Hey everyone, thanks for joining in. I'm Sanket from the investments team at Campus Fund, and today we're super excited to announce our investment in Serendipity space of how you started with the idea itself. Can you walk us through that? Yeah. What role does microgravity actually play here? Why do we need to manufacture drugs in space?
Switching off gravity also switched off some of the fundamental forces that you sort of see on Earth, such as sedimentation, convection currents, buoyancy, or few of these forces.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining in. I'm Sanket from the investments team at Campus Fund, and today we're super excited to announce our investment in Serendipity Space. I have with me the founder of Serendipity Space, Antariksh. Antariksh, welcome and thank you so much for doing this. I'll start off this with I think a very obvious question. The fact that you're building in space itself is serendipity. Was that how the name came into being? And can you walk us through your journey of how you started with the idea itself? Can you walk us through that? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me, Sanket, and super pumped about the new chapter. Well, it is serendipitous, but I had no plans of doing this. It was very serendipitous that I actually came across a paper which led to the idea. This was back in 2023 when I was actually doing some research on cancer drugs because one of my family members was actually going through cancer treatment, and then I just wanted to sort of understand how is it made, what are the side effects, etc. on patients, and I just stumbled upon a paper published in Nature by Merck, where they actually made a subcutaneous version of a cancer drug. Usually cancer drugs are intravenous, so patients go to the hospital, spend 4 to 5 hours in the hospital getting that drug administered, and even then, that actually induces a lot of pressure on the entire healthcare ecosystem. But Merck found a way to go to space, make a subcutaneous formulation of the same drug, which by the way is the world's largest, highest selling drug ever, and they were able to make a subcutaneous formulation out of it, which means that patients can sit at their home and get the drug administered, and they don't need to go to the hospital, just like an insulin shot. And that is something that excited me about the future, because usually deep tech companies, the problem that you're trying to solve is not exactly something that you face in your daily life, but in this case it was just serendipitous that I did know what it meant to actually solve the problem.
No, absolutely, and I think for a lot of people who are listening, they might not be familiar with the entire back end of pharma R&D. What happens? Why is drug development actually so hard and expensive? What exactly is the problem that Serendipity is solving for?
Right. Our mission is to accelerate drug development, using the space environment as a catalyst to basically reduce the drug development timelines of any simple pharmaceutical company on Earth. The reason, I mean, the statistic that we tried out solving for is actually that if you want to make a drug today and bring it from its birth to its maturity, it takes about 10 to 15 years. It costs $2 to $3 billion, and even then the failure rate can be as high as 90% at any stages. At any of the stages that during the development. Now, we were curious about why is this the case. It's 2025. Why does it take so long? Why does it cost so much? And is there anything that we can do to actually solve this? And we realized that once we broke down what were the steps in drug development, we realized that there were basically 3 steps. One is actually discovery of the drug compound, or the synthesis of the drug compound, which basically has to be optimized and developed into something known as a formulation, which is an injectable, which can be injected into mice, monkeys, or humans. And once it has successfully performed in those animal models, it can go into clinical trials and then mass manufacturing. We are not focused on the clinical trials part. We are focused on the step 1 and step 2, which is the discovery and synthesis of the drug compound and its development into a formulation. These are the 2 steps that we're focusing on, and space actually bypasses a lot of the problems which are industrial, chemical, literal scientific problems that happen in the lab on the industrial scale, that cannot be addressed with any other technology,
I think I
because
was going to
you're
come to
playing.
that. I was going to come to that itself. What role does microgravity actually play here? I mean, that's the reason why space manufacturing itself is sort of seeing a boom. So, can you explain to us as to what is the entire role of microgravity here? Why do we need to manufacture drugs in space?
Right. So this is not a new idea. This has been happening since late 1980s. So it's a pretty old concept. How it actually came about is the International Space Station and other space stations back then were up there, and then people were trying to make materials in during orbiting around the Earth, and they realized that switching off gravity also switched off some of the fundamental forces that you sort of see on Earth, such as sedimentation, convection currents, buoyancy, or few of these forces. And to their surprise, that had a pretty good impact on the manufacturing of any material, not only pharmaceuticals, because these forces on Earth often induce defects in materials, be it pharmaceuticals, be it semiconductors, be it metal alloys, you name it. But switching off gravity switches off these three forces, which is sedimentation, convection currents, and buoyancy. And then what eventually ends up happening is that you get materials which are much purer, or materials which you cannot actually traditionally make on Earth, because you cannot invent a machine that actually reduces sedimentation or convection, and so we have to resort to space. So space provides that unique platform where you can sort of push the frontier of drug discovery or drug development, such that you can actually get some of these drugs that you never were able to manufacture on Earth. And by that example also accelerate drug development, because a lot of the intermediate drug products that are formed during the manufacturing chain or during the drug development timeline, they also encounter failures, which means that you have to do years of trial and error. And if you can go to space and sort of bypass the amount of time and money spent in doing this, then if a few trips can save you a couple of years, that's a tremendous amount of money and time saved.
Got it. So I think it's more around the time saving that obviously is a factor, because I think the crystallization, what you said, accelerates the protein crystallization. If I'm not wrong, can you sort of explain that?
Okay, perfect. So crystallization is a very important step in during drug development, discovery, as well as manufacturing, because it has twofold usage. Number one is crystallizing new proteins, or crystallizing very difficult proteins can actually enhance the rate of drug development, which means that if you're able to get these protein crystals, you'll be able to, and notably very good crystals with very high resolution, very high quality, you can actually discover drugs much faster. A main problem is that you don't usually find a lot of proteins that crystallize on Earth because of their high, molecular weight. So it sort of collapses under its own weight in gravity, as well as forces such as convection actually interrupt the crystallization process. Crystallization is basically nothing but making a crystal of a substance. You can name sugar crystals or salt crystals that we even add in our food. Those are also crystals, and it's a very simple process that you actually grow crystals. It's the same process that happens in pharmaceuticals as well. It's just that pharmaceuticals are complex molecules as well, and so are proteins, and growing crystals of them actually is much tougher. So if you have crystals made in space, I mean, you actually, why do you, the rationale you go to space is that you can have uninterrupted growth of these crystals,
Okay.
uninterrupted by gravity, uninterrupted by convection, uninterrupted by sedimentation as well, which leads to large crystals, large and uniform crystals which are formed. And as a result of this, once you bring those crystals back down, and by the way, once you bring it to Earth's gravity, it still retains its form. Once you bring it back down, you can use that crystal to accelerate drug development, such that the search space of compounds that you were looking at to discover a drug compound, that reduces dramatically. So you don't need to search something like 20,000 compounds. You can maybe do something like 10 if you have the crystal, because you exactly know how the protein structure looks like, and then you can discover a drug which is basically fits the structure of the protein. So that's how you end up saving a lot of time and cost. This is often known as structure based drug discovery in the pharmaceutical industry. And so this is the discovery aspect. When you crystallize proteins, you end up using them to actually discover new drugs, which traditionally would have taken you 7 to 8 years. If you can collapse that down to a couple of trips to space in a year, that's fantastic. The
And how
second
much would the
aspect,
time reduction be in this case?
basically, structure based drug design programs aim to reduce the timeline by 3 to 4 years at minimum of a drug. So you can come down from a decade to maybe like 5 to 6 years. So that's almost like half of reduction of time as well as cost, because there is a tremendous amount of infrastructure, human capital that goes into doing multiple of these things. And the second aspect of this is also manufacturing the APIs. So we can also manufacture APIs in space. APIs stand for active pharmaceutical ingredients, which is the core therapeutic ingredient in any medication. If you take a Dolo tablet, if you take a Dolo 650, the 650 stands for 650 milligrams of the core therapeutic product. So you can also make the core therapeutic product up there and bring it back down. And the unique advantage is that you can make novel forms of the same drug that usually do not form on Earth. And case in point is there have been many drugs. So, for example, ritonavir, which was made in 1990s, and it was brought onto the market. But then when patients started taking it, they realized that it is not a stable form, and it is crystallizing in a different form inside the human body and started to have side effects. Now, if we had existed, or if in general the in space manufacturing industry had existed back then, you would have been able to make a different and more stable form of the same drug, and hence not face the entire loss of running an entire drug development program within the company, which costed the company, close to $1 billion. So yeah,
Actually, that's a
these are the
very
two things
important
that you can do.
segue
Yeah.
into understanding how large is the market here, because there are so many molecules from what I understand that go into, say, the discovery process, and very few come outside that funnel, right? So something like this, how can it accelerate? How large is the market, and how do we see this?
So, I mean, the market is easily over $1 billion. And the reason I say that is you will see a lot of, for example, AI drug discovery companies as well coming out with drug development contracts, which are multi-billion-dollar deals for a few targets, for a few protein targets. And that actually shows you that from if you can get your hands into collapsing this timeline of or the certain or collapsing the uncertainty in this process, you can actually end up with a lot of value created for pharmaceutical companies, because it actually ends up saving them billions of dollars in the long term. And so
Makes sense.
just as a example, Keytruda, which is the drug that I was talking about, does $25 billion in sales annually. Okay, and it's the highest selling drug that humanity has ever made. Now, in front of that, spending a couple of $1 billion is peanuts. It's sort of like 1/25th the cost, right? And even if you can do that and accelerate the drug development timeline for such a drug, you actually end up with much more profits for the pharmaceutical companies. So the market is easily above $1 billion. The typical drug discovery market is around 10 to 15, 10 to $12 billion. And you have something like $8 to $10 billion class of manufacturing the API, sort of like a CDMO, contract manufacturing organization. So yeah.
Makes sense. Very interesting. Awesome. So we've understood the importance of microgravity as to why I think drug development is accelerated when it's taken to space, right? Take us behind the scenes. What exactly is happening? How is Serendipity able to do this? What is the technology that you're building, both from a technology perspective that goes into space versus the understanding of the entire crystallization format, the pharma science behind that, if you can explain that.
Right. Yeah. So, technically, I sort of started looking at research papers which were doing crystallization, on Earth, in space as well. And I realized that the stark differences, there were very stark differences between, pharmaceutical and protein crystals produced in space versus on Earth. Notably, that the sizes were much larger when they were produced in space. The quality was much better. They had defined geometries, and also resolution when it was brought back and tested. The process is essentially mixing. I mean, from a physicist's perspective, which I have a background in physics, from a physicist's perspective, it is basically mixing and heating, but it needs precision of concentration of volume. And what we are essentially doing is, how we sort of came about was essentially we wanted to build, like, okay, can we go to the International Space Station and do it? We started where the world had already done. And when we interviewed pharmaceutical companies, they complained a lot about a lot of things which sort of brought a barrier to continuous development in space, which was that they didn't get often enough opportunities to go to space repeatedly. There was not a dedicated platform, and the cost in general of doing this was very high, because the moment you involve humans in the loop of going to space, everything suddenly becomes 10 times or 100 times more expensive. And that's where we thought that, is there a possibility where we can remove the human in the loop and we can create an autonomous lab or factory, so to say, which can make these pharmaceuticals in space and can at least inform us that, hey, your pharmaceuticals have begun manufacturing and now it has been finished. And once we can do that, if we can develop a technology such that the satellites can also return to Earth, using a heat sheet, then we will also be able to do this entirely autonomously, which means that you are looking at in space manufacturing costing you almost the same as terrestrial markets when at scale. So you will be able to get the same and much more valuable products at the same terrestrial prices. Once you automate the entire process, there is a way to do that, and that's exactly how we came in. We said, okay, if we had to create a new market, if the industry had to exist, then what is the ultimate technology that can make it happen? And it was not any intermediate or like an incremental improvement in any of these technologies. It had to be a rethinking of the a satellite, of what a satellite is capable of. And then we thought that, okay, if we can automate, we went out and we asked that what is the hardware exactly required. And then we realized that it is precise. You need to move the fluids and the solutions precisely in concentrated volumes, in channels, etc., and then induce crystallization of these pharmaceuticals or proteins. It was not super complicated, but it has to be precise, and that control, that trade-off is always there. And so we ended up creating a small pharmaceutical lab which can autonomously do this. And we tested the crystallization of a few compounds and proteins as well, and successfully it worked. And so
I'm so sorry. I'm saying, so when you talk about a lab, the lab is this lab would go into space, the crystallization takes place, and then it comes down. Is that how you see it?
yes, so right now the lab that we have made is essentially the heart of the payload of a satellite. We have not built out the entire satellite yet, obviously. So this payload or heart of the satellite can go to space and autonomously conduct crystallization of pharmaceuticals or proteins. I mean, small molecules or protein molecules, and also send us data back down saying that, hey, this is the quality of the crystal, this is how it's made. We have a monitoring system as well. And then once we know that something like that has finished, our process has finished, we equip it. The payload will basically be a part of a slightly larger satellite which can return to Earth on its own as well. Now these satellites will be about the size of a travel suitcase that we carry around in our trips, and that's about it. And we just pack our small miniature lab into the satellite. We equip it with something known as a heat shield, because when you're re-entering, you re-enter at high speeds and there's a lot of heat generated. So to protect the main satellite body from it, we are developing a heat shield. And then autonomously, once it comes back, it'll deploy parachutes and then have a soft landing somewhere on the coast, or we are exploring land options as well. And then we basically retrieve the pharmaceutical or protein crystals, we do the analysis, and we provide the same to pharmaceutical companies as well.
Very interesting. Very interesting. And probably that's where I want to understand, because there are so many components that come joining together in this. You have the entire satellite building piece, the entire lab sort of a thing that is going into space, and the entire part of re-entry that you'll have to plan. Right? What are the capabilities that you have in your team at the moment? I mean, I'm aware, but would love to know with respect to your team, your background, how you sort of coming together in building this out.
Right. When the idea sort of struck, this was late 2023, second half of 2023 is when the idea sort of came to my head, and we were like, okay, maybe we can. This is something we can explore. I was doing my masters in Germany back then. When the idea came about, I did some research. I talked to some people in Munich, as well as in India, to understand that, hey, is something like this possible? What is the interest about doing something like this? And once I got a few core tenets formed, I actually reached out to one of my high school friends called Jivitesh, who's now the CTO of the company. And he's one of those people where the first question that in my mind was, okay, who's that one person I can go to and just pitch this idea to? And the person would not say what or why, but would say how. And that's exactly what his answer was. He's like, yeah, I don't care what or why, how do you build this out? And so he formed, he sort of brainstormed the ideas with me. And initially he said, yeah, I have been the CTO of another company, it's not pretty, and there was resistance. But then for like 4 or 5 months we tried to develop and see whether there are any leakages in the plan, and there seemingly weren't. And after that 4 or 5 month deliberation, we were like, okay, maybe we should think about building this. And then my other co-founder, Monica, she previously worked at NASA, and she's the one who has actually space heritage in our team, who has actually sent something to the ISS. She was working on the Astro B program, back in 2021, 2022. So she knows a thing or two about space. And I actually met her in New York, and I texted her saying, hey, I have this idea I want to run by you. And we met for a couple of coffees, and I was basically telling her the idea, and she was like, yeah, maybe you should think about this. These are the problems. These are the problems. I basically wanted her to roast the idea completely, like say why it is a very bad idea to pursue this. And she did that up until 3 to 4 weeks, where both of us realized that we can't really point out what's wrong anymore. because we filled the gaps. And
Hmm.
that's exactly when all three of us, we understood that it's time to take a leap and actually build out this company. And so Jivitesh comes in with a robotics, manufacturing, and AI expertise. And Monica comes in with space robotics and, in general, space systems architecture knowledge, as well as software. They're like two very super smart people who basically taught me a lot of things. And
You're
frankly, when
adding
you're
all the
starting a
physics to the you're adding
yeah,
all the
yeah. So
physics to the team.
so my job, my essential job was, these guys know tech stuff much better than me, in some sense, at least with space and with a lot of manufacturing things that I learned from them. My job was to become an expert in pharmaceuticals. And so I basically read like 200 research papers on how pharmaceutical manufacturing is done, what is crystallization, what is proteins, how do proteins crystallize, how do small molecules crystallize. And I developed that corpus of knowledge so that I can at least have a conversation with a pharmaceutical scientist from, let's say, a pharmaceutical company, because that is very important, because if any
Makes
customers have to
sense.
come, we really have to know deep down what exactly we're building. And so my job was basically to understand the customer experience of creating a pharmaceutical drug, a pharmaceutical or like a protein drug, and also understanding the physics of it. And that's where my skills came in, that I could understand a lot of it, because it was not very different from the physics that I have been also doing. That's how. So yeah, Jivitesh comes in
If
with
I were to
robotics
ask
and
you,
AI.
sorry, please continue.
Yeah, so that's basically the construct of the team. Jivitesh comes in with his technical knowledge, Monica with her space knowledge, and me with a bit of a business development expertise, as well as understanding of the pharmaceutical processes. That's how exactly.
Oh, very interesting, team construct as well. My question is to understand. There are a lot of technical challenges. What are some of these key technical challenges that you foresee as you will go out to build this?
Right. Fortunately, this idea has been done over the last 30 years. So we have a lot of established science and results already, saying whether it will be successful or not. So, and the answer is a resounding yes, because a lot of proteins, over like 500 different compounds, have been crystallized in the ISS over the last 20 years. And that sort of gave us confidence that at least the pharma side or the scientific side of it is known to some extent,
Hmm.
and we can work our way around that.
Hmm.
The main, still, it is a challenge that we will be will we'll need to send the module up a couple of times to actually do the in-space manufacturing and test it out ourselves, because the world
Yeah,
has
no,
done it does not
obviously.
mean that we have done it, obviously. So in that part, at least we know what the things can go wrong, etc., because we have data over the last 20-30 years. But the unique thing that we're trying to solve is creating a fully autonomous platform that can also return, and
Hmm.
that is where a significant challenge is upon us, which is, how do you safely bring this satellite
Hmm.
back,
Hmm.
and land it safely such that your pharmaceuticals survive. And this is a unique challenge, that not, I mean, now we are seeing an emergence of companies doing re-entry right now. And, we thought that, okay, this is something that we need to establish. By the way, we didn't set out to do re-entry. We just thought that we'll just make the box and send it to the ISS and just do it. But then after doing something like 20 to 30 customer interviews, we realized that they gave us a long list of rants. So whenever we used to talk to customers, it was a 1 hour rant about why we can't do this right now, but we want to do this. And we essentially took the rant and established the technology out of it, which is like their rants became our specifications. And then we realized that, to actually do this cost effectively and independently, so as to support pharmaceutical companies regularly and very, with a, how to almost make it boring for them, that it becomes a very normal thing for them. We need to own the entire chain. We can't do only the pharmaceutical box. We can't do only the satellites. We have to do
You
both.
can't just leave it there. You have to bring it back as well.
Yeah. You can't like use the ISS to, because then the thing is, you actually give up control of your entire customer experience.
Makes sense.
If you outsource it to a satellite operator, if you outsource it to the ISS, you actually virtually have no control over the timelines, the length of time and the cost that you're spending. And so it was very important that we established everything in house, so that we can do this as an end-to-end service. And when they are interacting with us, when pharmaceutical companies interact with us, they should not feel like we are a space company. They should feel like we are just another pharmaceutical CRO or contract research organization. They come in,
Wow.
they're like, hey, we want this pharmaceutical crystallized. Frankly, they don't care. We might as
Hmm.
well be doing it in a backyard, and they don't care if we're going to space or not. And that's exactly what the experience should be for them as well. That it should be such a routine experience that they don't need to worry about it.
Sounds very fancy, Antariksh. Uh, how does the future look from here? Are there missions planned? Um, what is the roadmap looking like ahead? The next couple of years, what do you plan to achieve?
So just right off the bat, in the next 1 year, we essentially plan to do one tech demonstration of doing in-space manufacturing actually in space. So we're going to send the small pharmaceutical module to space with whatever opportunity we get, depending on Indian launch, ISRO's launch scenarios, and across the world. So we are keeping our options open such that we are making the hardware and we're just ready for opportunities whenever they pop up, so that we can actually use multiple launch opportunities to go and do multiple demos. So that's our approach that we're keeping. And along with that, we will start out developing the heat shields. So we want to do, the initial design and, sort of manufacturing of the heat shield in the next 1 year as well, and do something like a drop test, which is to analyze the drag on it, how it performs aerodynamically, as well as if all our deployment mechanisms for the heat shield are intact. And fortunately, we have found the necessary infrastructure to do all of it in India. And so at least this is something that we have control over. And over the next, so this is for 1 year. Over the next 5 years, we have one goal, which is to make this vertical of the company completely boring. That's all. Like, it should be so frequent. It's almost like SpaceX transport emissions. Like, they launch a rocket every week, and we want to do the same thing. Maybe not as frequently, but something like once every quarter. We want to establish that cadence, that the moment a pharmaceutical company comes in with their interest, we are able to launch a satellite within the next 1 or 2 months and do the crystallization and return within a month. And so the process is that you send the satellite up to low Earth orbit, you spend a couple of weeks or a month over there, and then you bring it back down. And so this entire process takes approximately a month. So within something like 2 to 3 months, we should be giving the required outcomes for pharmaceutical companies. And so in the 5 years vision, that's the plan, that we want to make this small scale crystallization vertical completely boring. So that's the goal.
Very interesting, very ambitious. Obviously, yeah, wishing you all the luck. I'll jump into the last part of the conversation today, which is that you started while you were in university. You were doing your masters, etc. A big part of the crowd who is going to, or the people who are going to watch this, our students are looking to start up. A lot of them come from technical universities, have a bunch of deep tech ideas. What is your advice for them? How do you go about that -1 to 0 journey, and then sort of say a 0 to 1 journey? What did you do differently? How did you go about figuring out the problem statement? Any advice that you have that you'd want to give to them? I think would love to hear from you.
So I'll list out a couple of things of how I approached, like how the idea came about. That would answer all the things that you actually mentioned. Uh, in 2023, around August, I knew that 1 year down the line, I would graduate, and I had no clue what I would do with my life. So the first question was, what do I do? I just took like a buffer. It sort of occurred to me that I need to start thinking about it from now on, because it's a long process, to filter out the best thing for yourself to do, to build, and best thing for the world to build. It takes some time. So I actually started 1 year before about what to do with my life. So it was a completely selfish motive. And I read one of Paul Graham's essays. Actually, he writes fantastic essays. He's the founder of Y Combinator, and he had written that when you're starting out with an idea, whatever you have currently around you, just build up from there and just see where your thoughts lead you to, and just start to explore and give yourself enough time to actually go deep into industries, ideas, whether something is executable, whether someone's doing it, etc. And the serendipitously also, that I was working back then in a force sensor startup in Munich, and they were building these tactile sensors which were used for telerobotics, which means that you'll be able to control a robot sitting at home. Let's say something like, if I'm sitting in Bhubaneswar, I'm sitting, I can control a robot in Chennai, and that's what those are the sensors they were developing. And then from that, it stemmed that, hey, so it means that telerobotics is going to be a very important use case or an industry for space, because sending humans is expensive. Wherever humans cannot go, you want to naturally send something like human extensions of your capability, right? And that's how we were like, okay, then the International Space Station came over, then the research came over, and then that's how the idea happened. It was very, very exploratory. I gave myself enough time to actually think about what to do in life. Once the idea is there, and once I had at least some idea that, okay, this might just be possible, I sought out all sorts of advice about what to build and what not to build. So
Hmm.
I talk to industry veterans, I talk to customers, whether this is a real need, whether a market can be created, what does the technology look like. And I did a very, like all three of us, all the three founders, we actually spent something like 8 months before we even registered the company. We spent almost like a year understanding the market, understanding the tech, and building out what is going to be the best case scenario of a
Hmm.
technology to build this out. And so plenty of time we had spent before registering the company. And once we had the conviction that we have the skills, we know how
Hmm.
to build it out, and there is a need, that sort of like a ikigai intersection we had. That's when we realized that, okay, it's out, it's time to go out and build. And once we registered the company and moved forward, it was basically that we try out building the core key technologies quickly, such that we can validate them and demonstrate them, so that we at least get some customer validation as well, which we did. And that actually helped us in even in our fundraise journey, even in talking to other customers. Our network grew because we were doing all this. Fortunately, everyone who has sort of supported us in the incubation centers at ILS and so on, they actually connected us to pharmaceutical professionals, where we actually understood that, okay, well, we kept learning about things and producing prototypes. But essentially, we went all in with our savings, built out the prototype. It's okay to delay the fundraising process as much as you can, and be very scrappy in building the hardware. Once you have done, then you'll ensure a very good fundraising process for yourself, because you will
Very
have spent
interesting.
enough time in the idea and the prototype.
Very interesting. Maybe I'll just sort of summarize that. I think the one thing that you definitely mentioned was that take your initial idea and sort of dive into it and let it uncover however it uncovers itself. You could be building the same thing, you could be building a very different thing, but at least the place where you started, that itself will sort of drive you forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the most natural extension, right? It's what you know. You're starting out from where you know, so you end up with some amount of confidence that you'll stumble upon some valuable idea, which is an extension of what you're doing currently. So
Very
it's a
interesting.
good way
Makes
to
a lot of
explore things.
sense. Awesome. Awesome. This was a great conversation, Antariksh. Thank you so much for taking the time. We'll obviously have like an entire session around diving deeper into maybe understanding a little more into the technicalities bit, but I think this was very good for all of our audience as well. So yeah, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.